I had spent months preparing for Kate's wedding. I wanted everything to be perfect for her. I knew how important this day was, and it seemed like all of my sacrifices, working late hours, putting my own dreams aside to support her, making sure she had everything she wanted, were finally going to pay off. I was proud of her, proud of the woman she had become. I had always been her rock, and she had always looked to me for guidance. But on the night before the wedding, everything changed. I was sitting at the kitchen table, going over last-minute details for the event when the phone rang. It was Kate. My heart skipped a beat as I answered. She had been distant lately, but I figured it was just pre-wedding nerves. She was probably calling to ask about the final touches for the ceremony or maybe to make sure the guests were set up for the reception. But when I heard her voice, something in her tone made my stomach twist. "Dad, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice cold, distant. "Of course, sweetheart. What's wrong? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," she replied, but I could tell something was off. There was a hesitation in her voice, a weight behind her words. I need to tell you something about the wedding." I felt a knot form in my chest. "What is it?" There's no easy way to say this, but she paused, and I could hear her taking a deep breath on the other end of the line. "You're not invited." For a moment, the world around me went silent. I blinked, not sure if I had heard her right. "What do you mean? This your wedding, Kate?" "Of course I'm invited. I'm sorry, but it's complicated." Her voice was almost apologetic, but there was no warmth, no reassurance. "I've already made arrangements with David's family. They're hosting the wedding and, well, it's just better if you don't come." I stood up, my legs suddenly feeling weak. "Kate, what are you talking about? I've been planning for this day for months. I've helped you every step of the way. You're telling me that after all I've done for you, you don't want me there?" There was a long pause, and when she spoke again, it felt like she was reading from a script. "Dad, it's not about you. It's just I don't want things to be awkward, you know? David's family has a lot of important people coming, and I don't want them to feel uncomfortable. Your background, the way things are, it's just not a good fit." I felt my chest tighten as the words hit me like a punch. My background? The life I had worked so hard to build for her? It suddenly didn't matter. My whole life. Every choice I made. Every sacrifice. Every hour I spent away from home to provide for her meant nothing. "Are you seriously telling me that you're embarrassed by me?" I asked, my voice trembling despite myself. "Dad, please, I don't want to fight about this. It's just how things are. I don't have time to explain. I hope you understand." She hung up before I could respond, leaving me standing there, holding the phone to my ear. The silence in the room felt deafening. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Everything I thought I knew about my daughter, about the family I had devoted my life to, shattered in an instant. I walked to the living room, my hands shaking as I sank into the couch. How could she do this to me? How could she treat me like I was some kind of stranger? Someone to be hidden away, discarded when it was convenient. I'd been the one who worked long hours so she could go to the best schools, the one who gave up his own dreams to make sure she had everything she needed. And now, on the most important day of her life, she couldn't even give me the decency of a place at the table. Laura, my wife, came into the room after hearing the phone conversation. She stood at the doorway, looking at me with a strange mixture of concern and discomfort. "Richard," I don't know what to say. I looked up at her, feeling a rush of anger, disbelief, and hurt all at once. "Did you know about this? Did you know she wasn't going to invite me?" She avoided my gaze, stepping further into the room. "She told me about it earlier. She thought it would be best. David's family is very well, they're different. They have connections, you know?" I shook my head, trying to process what she was saying. "So you're just going to let this happen? You're just going to stand there and tell me this is okay?" Laura sat down beside me, her hand on my shoulder. "Richard, you have to understand. This is Kate's wedding. It's her day. We don't want to make things difficult for her." "Difficult for her?" I repeated, my voice rising. "What about everything I've done for her? What about the sacrifices? Does that mean nothing? Please, Richard." she said, her voice soft but firm. I know you're upset, but you have to think about the bigger picture. We don't want to make a scene. I stood up, my fists clenched at my sides. A scene? What about the scene she's made by shutting me out? What about the years of my life I've given to this family? I don't even matter to her anymore, Laura. She didn't respond. She just looked at the floor, unable or unwilling to meet my eyes. I couldn't stay there anymore. I couldn't look at her. Couldn't stand the suffocating atmosphere of betrayal. I grabbed my coat and walked out the door without a word, leaving her sitting there, silent. Outside, the air was cold, but I didn't feel it. I barely registered the passing cars or the muffled sounds of the city. All I could think about was the emptiness that had settled inside me. Kate had chosen her new life over me, my own daughter, the girl I had raised, the one I had given everything for. She didn't even want me at her wedding. I walked aimlessly, my mind a storm of confusion and pain. I had spent so much of my life being the person everyone depended on, and now I was nothing more than a ghost. Couldn't go back. Not yet. I spent the next few days in a daze. It felt like everything I had built, my family, my life, my place in the world, had crumbled all at once. I didn't know where to go or who to talk to. I didn't want to burden anyone with my pain, so I kept to myself. It was easier that way. I told myself I just needed time to process it all. But in reality, I couldn't stop thinking about Kate. I couldn't stop thinking about the coldness in her voice when she told me I wasn't invited to her wedding. Kept replaying in my head, over and over, like some kind of twisted loop. Every time I tried to reach out to her, I got nothing. She didn't answer my calls. She didn't respond to my texts. And when I showed up at her door, she wasn't home. I felt like a ghost, fading into the background of my own life. But what hurt the most wasn't just being shut out by Kate. It was how everyone else seemed to go along with it. Laura, my wife, didn't try to fight for me. She didn't even stand up for me when Kate made it clear I wasn't wanted. Instead, she sided with Kate. I'd never seen her look so passive, so willing to let her daughter make decisions that affected our whole family. The days dragged on, each one feeling heavier than the last, but I couldn't shake the sense of betrayal that gnawed at me. Then, one morning, I woke up to the sound of someone knocking on the door to the shed. I hadn't even realized how much time had passed since I'd been relegated to the small, cramped space behind our house. The shed had become my home now. The cold, hard walls mirrored the emptiness I felt inside. I went to the door, still groggy, expecting maybe a delivery or a neighbor needing something. But when I opened it, I found David standing there, his expression unreadable. "Hey," he said, his tone flat for another round of his condescending attitude. But I stepped aside and let him in. David had never been a fan of me. He always looked down on me, like I was a nuisance to his perfect life with Kate. But this was something else. The way he stood there, his hands in his pockets, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. I knew something was coming, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for it. "I don't know how to put this, Richard, but you need to leave," he said, his words blunt and without empathy. I blinked, unable to fully process what I was hearing. "What? You heard me. You can't keep living here." He shifted uncomfortably. "Look, it's just that it's not working out. You're making things awkward for Kate and for me." I stared at him, speechless. How had it come to this? He was asking me to leave my own home, asking me to leave the place where I had spent the last 30 years of my life, where I had raised my children, where I had given everything for this family. I felt a surge of anger rise in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. I knew if I lost my temper now, I'd only make it worse. "David, this is ridiculous," I said, my voice low and controlled. "I've been here for years. I've worked my whole life to support this family. And now you want me to just leave?" He didn't flinch. "It's not personal, okay? But Kate and I have made some decisions about the house, and well, you don't fit into our plans anymore." I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. "Plans? What plans? You've made a plan to throw me out, to get rid of me like I'm some kind of burden?" David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's just the way it has to be, Richard. I'm not trying to be cruel, but Kate's moving forward. and she wants to start fresh. You're holding her back. The words hit me like a slap across the face. I'm holding her back? I repeated, my voice trembling now. I've given her everything, David. Everything. And this is how you repay me. He didn't answer. He just looked at me with that same blank expression, as if he couldn't care less about my feelings. He had made up his mind, and I was nothing more than an obstacle in the way of his perfect, polished life. I wanted to argue, to fight him. I wanted to scream that he had no right to do this. But something in me broke. I was so tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of being the one who always gave and never got anything in return. The hurt, the betrayal, it was all too much. So instead of raising my voice, I simply turned away and walked back into the shed. David didn't follow. He left without another word. And I stood there in the silence, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. I couldn't even look at the house anymore. I couldn't look at my wife, my daughter. I didn't know where I fit in anymore. Over the next few days, I spent most of my time outside the house. I went for long walks in the park, trying to clear my head. But the more I thought about everything, the more I realized I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep letting them walk all over me. They had used me my whole life. My money, my time, my effort. And now that they didn't need me anymore, they were throwing me away. I wasn't going to let them do it. Not again. I needed answers. And the only person who could give them to me was Kate. One evening, when I couldn't stand the isolation anymore, I decided to go to her apartment. I hadn't been there since the wedding, and I wasn't sure how she'd react. But I had to try. I had to hear it from her own mouth. Why she had done this to me. When I arrived at her building, I hesitated outside the door. I didn't know what to expect, but the anger was burning inside me, and I couldn't hold it back anymore. I rang the doorbell, and after a long moment, Kate answered. She looked surprised, but there was no warmth in her eyes. No relief that I was there, just a cold distance. "Dad," she said, her voice flat. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you," I said, forcing the words through the lump in my throat. "I need to understand what happened. Why are you treating me like this?" Kate didn't say anything at first. She just looked at me like she was trying to figure out how to get rid of me. Finally, she sighed, stepping aside to let me in. "You don't understand, do you?" she said, sitting down on the couch. "I had to make a choice. I'm married now. I have a new life. And that life doesn't include you. Not the way it used to." The words stung like 1,000 needles, but I needed to hear it. I needed to hear her admit that she had chosen her new life over the one we had shared, over everything I had given her. "I'm sorry, Dad," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. "But you just don't fit in anymore." Kate's words echoed in my head long after I left her apartment. She had said it so simply, so coldly, as if nothing I had done for her meant anything. I couldn't comprehend it. All those years of hard work, of sacrifice, of pouring everything I had into her future. And now she was telling me that I didn't fit into her new life? My stomach churned with disbelief. But the truth was right there, staring me in the face. She didn't need me anymore. She had moved on, and I was just a relic of the past. The car ride back home felt endless. I didn't want to go back to the house, to the shed that had become my prison. But I didn't know where else to go. I couldn't afford to rent a place on my own. My savings had been depleted over the years. All of it funneled into the life I had built for my family. And now I was left with nothing. No support, no home, no place to belong. It felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me, and I was falling with no end in sight. When I pulled up to the house, the lights were on in the living room. Laura was sitting on the couch, her face buried in her hands. I could see her shoulders shaking from where I stood. She was crying. It should have been a comfort to know she cared. But all I felt was a growing sense of resentment. She hadn't stood up for me when Kate shut me out. She hadn't said a word when David asked me to leave. I had always been the one to protect her, to protect our family. And now, when I needed her most, she was doing nothing. I opened the door slowly, trying not to make any noise. I didn't want to wake her, but I knew she wasn't sleeping. Not with the way her shoulders trembled. She looked up when I entered, her eyes puffy and red. But she didn't say anything. She just stared at me, like she didn't know who I was anymore. I stood there, unsure of what to say. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her how much she had hurt me, how much she had failed me, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I simply asked, "What's going on, Laura?" She wiped her face with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself. "I'm sorry, Richard," she said, her voice shaking. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to fix it. Fix what? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Fix what, Laura? Kate shut me out and you didn't do anything. You didn't even try to stop her. You let her throw me away like I was nothing. She opened her mouth to speak but closed it again, unsure of what to say. She couldn't even look at me. I didn't want her pity. I didn't want her apologies. I wanted her to stand up for me. I wanted her to fight for me, just like I had fought for her all those years. But it was clear that she wasn't going to. She had chosen her daughter, her new life with David. "I don't know what to do and anymore. I was no longer part of Laura said, finally breaking the silence. "I've tried talking to Kate. I've tried to make her understand. But she's made up her mind. And David, he's not going to let me change anything." I felt my blood run cold. "So that's it then? You're just going to give up? You're just going to let them push me out? Like I don't matter?" She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time in a long while, I saw something in her eyes that wasn't just resignation. It was guilt, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to fix the damage that had already been done. "I don't know what else to do, Richard," she said, her voice barely audible. "I am sorry." Her words stung, but I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to yell, to demand answers, to make her understand how much she had hurt me, but I couldn't. I was too tired, too defeated. All the fight had been drained from me. I had given everything to this family, and now they had nothing left for me. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving Laura alone in her guilt. I couldn't stand to be near her. I couldn't stand the way she looked at me, like I was a stranger, like I was something to be ashamed of. I wasn't the man I used to be. I wasn't the man I had spent so many years trying to be for her, for Kate, for our family. I was just a shadow now. The next few days passed in a blur. I spent most of my time in the shed, avoiding the house and everyone in it. Every time I went inside, it felt like I was intruding. Kate and Laura seemed to carry on with their lives, like nothing had happened. They didn't need me. I was just an inconvenience, a reminder of a life they had left behind. I tried calling Kate a few more times, but she never answered. I tried reaching out to her, to make her understand how much I was hurting, but she was gone. And it wasn't just her. It was David too. He had pushed me out of the house, and now he was pushing me out of their lives. He was the one controlling everything, calling the shots, and I was left on the outside, looking in. I couldn't let this continue. I couldn't let them erase me from their lives without a fight. I wasn't going to be cast aside. Not by Kate, not by Laura, not by anyone. I had sacrificed too much for this family to just disappear. One night, as I sat in the shed, staring at the empty walls, I made a decision. I was done being the invisible man. I was done being the one everyone took for granted. I had given them everything, and now it was time to take something back. I was going to confront David. I was going to make him understand that I was still here, still part of their lives, whether they liked it or not. The thought of facing him terrified me, but I couldn't back down. I couldn't let him or anyone else dictate my worth. It was time to take control. It was time to make them see me. The decision to confront David wasn't something I took lightly. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had been pushed around for far too long. I had spent my whole life trying to make others happy, trying to keep the peace, trying to be the good father, the good husband. But none of it had mattered. And now, when I needed them most, they had turned their backs on me. It was late in the evening when I finally decided I couldn't wait anymore. My hands were trembling, but the anger inside me kept me going. I knew I had to do this, even if it meant confronting the one person who had done everything in his power to make me feel small. I grabbed my coat and walked out of the shed, the cold air biting at my skin. The house loomed ahead, the lights still on in the living room. It felt strange to be walking up to the front door after all this time. like I didn't belong there anymore. But I wasn't going to let fear stop me. I had been pushed into this corner, and now I was going to fight my way out. I knocked on the door, the sound sharp in the quiet night. Took a moment for anyone to answer, and when the door finally creaked open, there he was, David. His face was unreadable, but I could see the flicker of recognition in his eyes. "What do you want, Richard?" he asked, his voice cold, like he was already preparing to shut me out. "I need to talk to you," I said, forcing myself to stand tall. "We need to talk." He hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside to let me in. The tension between us was thick enough to cut with a knife, but neither of us said anything as I stepped over the threshold. The house was quiet, too quiet. It was as if everything had been frozen in time. We stood there for a moment, neither of us knowing where to begin. I had so much to say, so much anger and hurt that I needed to get out, but the words wouldn't come. So, I just looked at him, trying to gauge what he was thinking. David wasn't one to show his emotions, but I could see a flicker of discomfort behind his mask of indifference. Finally, he spoke. "You shouldn't be here, Richard. We've already talked about this. Kate and I have made our decision." I clenched my fists, trying to keep my composure. "Your decision?" I repeated, the words coming out sharper than I intended. "What decision, David? The one where you kick me out of my own home? The one where you and Kate decide that I'm not good enough anymore? That I'm just some burden you can throw away when you're done with me?" David's jaw tightened, but he didn't back down. "It's not like that. You're making it sound worse than it is." "Oh, really?" I took a step closer, not caring anymore if I was making him uncomfortable. "Then explain it to me, David. Explain to me why you've treated me like I don't matter. Why you and Kate are both pretending I don't exist." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he crossed his arms, looking past me like he was trying to find an escape route. The silence between us grew longer, but I wasn't going to give up. Not this time. "I've given everything to this family," I said, my voice hoarse now. "I've worked my ass off for you, for Kate. I sacrificed everything so you could have the life you wanted. And now you want me to just walk away, to disappear." David's eyes flickered, but he didn't speak. Instead, he took a deep breath, like he was trying to gather his thoughts. And then, finally, he spoke again, but his words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Kate and I don't owe you anything, Richard," he said, his tone hardening. "You've done what you've done because you chose to. You chose to give up your own life for us. But we never asked for that. It was your choice." I felt a rush of blood to my face, the anger boiling over. "You think I did it for you? You think I did all that for you, David?" I laughed bitterly. "No, I did it for Kate. I did it because I wanted to give her a better life, because I wanted her to have the things I never had. But you know what? She's the one who turned her back on me. She's the one who tossed me out like I'm some kind of stranger." David's expression softened, but only slightly. "Kate's just trying to move on, Richard. She's building a life with me now. She's not a little girl anymore." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that she would always be my little girl, that I had been there for her through everything. But I couldn't. It wouldn't change anything. Kate had already made her choice, and nothing I said now was going to make a difference. But there was one thing I could still do. I wasn't going to let him or anyone else decide my fate. I wasn't going to let them erase me from their lives. My voice quieter now, but still laced with fury. "I'm not asking for your approval, David. I'm not asking for Kate's approval. I'm asking for respect. I'm asking for you to see me for once, to recognize that I'm not just a tool you can use and throw away when you're done with me." David looked at me, his eyes searching my face, like he was seeing me for the first time. It wasn't much, but for a moment, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Maybe regret, maybe understanding, but I couldn't be sure. "I'm not going to apologize, Richard," he said finally. "But I get it. I understand why you're upset." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. "I don't need your apology. I don't need your pity. But I'm not going to let this go. You and Kate have made your choices, but I'm still here. And I'm not going anywhere." David didn't say anything after that. He just stood there, watching me, his eyes unreadable. I turned and walked out of the house without another word. I didn't need closure from him. I didn't need him to fix this. What I needed was for them to understand that I wasn't just some old man they could ignore and push aside. But as I walked back to the shed, something inside me had shifted. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I couldn't let them control me anymore. I wasn't done yet. I wasn't invisible, and I wasn't going to let them forget me. The following days were a blur. I didn't feel like myself anymore, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what had changed. It was like I had woken up from a long, foggy sleep and suddenly realized I had been living in a dream. One where I was a supporting character in everyone else's lives. Kate was gone. Laura was distant. David was still here, but I wasn't sure anymore if he even cared. I kept thinking about my confrontation with David. At first, I had hoped it would spark something in him, something that would make him realize how wrong he was to treat me like an afterthought. But all I had gotten was his cold indifference. He understood, he said, but it didn't feel like understanding. Felt like pity, like I was some relic from the past who had outlived his usefulness. I had to remind myself not to get too discouraged. This wasn't about David. This wasn't about Kate or anyone else. This was about me, about finding myself again. I couldn't keep living in their shadow, waiting for them to throw me a bone or acknowledge that I had done my part. I had given enough. One morning, I woke up in the shed and decided I wasn't going to sit around anymore. I wasn't going to wallow in self-pity. I had been strong for so long, and I could do it again. I had to. I wasn't a man who gave up. I had sacrificed so much for my family. Too much. But now I was going to start living for myself. I put on my boots and stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The sun was barely up, but the sky had a pale blue hue that made everything feel fresh, like a new beginning. I walked down the path that led to the main house, my hands shoved deep into my pockets. There was something I needed to do, something I had been putting off. It had been gnawing at me, deep inside, ever since I had confronted David. Something wasn't right. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I knocked on the door again, this time with more purpose than before. I wasn't going to let them control my life anymore. I wasn't going to wait for an invitation or permission. I had spent too long on the sidelines. Laura answered the door, her face falling when she saw me standing there. She looked like she hadn't been sleeping well. Her eyes were puffy, and she had that defeated look that I had seen so many times before. But there was something different in her eyes now, something that felt like guilt but also confusion. She didn't know what to say to me. "I need to talk to you, Laura," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. I wasn't angry anymore. I had been angry enough to last a lifetime, and it hadn't gotten me anywhere. It wasn't anger that would fix this. It was understanding. She stepped aside without saying a word, and I walked into the house, feeling like I was walking into enemy territory. The house was quiet, too quiet. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the sound of the wind outside, but nothing else. No laughter, no conversation, just silence. We sat at the kitchen table. Neither of us spoke for a while. I didn't know where to begin. The weight of everything that had happened between us hung between us like a thick fog, suffocating the air. But I had to say something. I couldn't keep bottling it up. "Laura," I started, my voice soft. "I don't want to fight anymore. I don't want to be angry at you. But I need you to understand something. I've been here for you. I've been here for Kate. I've done everything I could to give you both a better life. And now I need you to see me. I need you to realize that I'm not just some man you can push aside when it's convenient. I need respect, not pity. Respect." She looked down at the table, her hands folded in front of her. She didn't say anything for a long time. I could see her mind working, but the words weren't coming. When she finally looked up at me, her face was wet with tears. "I know," she whispered. "I know I've let you down, but I don't know what to do. I don't know how to fix this." I felt a pang of sadness at the sight of her like this. I had spent so many years taking care of her, of trying to keep everything together. I hadn't realized until now how much I had been holding on to, how much I had been carrying alone. And it wasn't just Kate. It was Laura too. "You don't have to fix it, Laura," I said, my voice steady now. You just have to see it. See me. I don't want your sympathy. I don't want you to feel guilty. But I need you to understand how much this hurts. How much it's been eating me up inside. Knowing that I've given everything and still don't matter. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. Her eyes red and swollen. I'm sorry, she said again, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry, Richard. I never meant for it to get like this. But Kate, she's changed. She's different now. And David, he's not going to let me change anything. I don't know how to make this right. I could see the conflict in her eyes. The pain of wanting to help but feeling helpless. I wanted to tell her it was okay. That I understood. But it wasn't okay. Not yet. We weren't there yet. But I could see she was trying. And for now, that was enough. You don't have to make anything right, Laura, I said softly. I'm not asking you to fix me or to fix anything. I just need you to see the truth. I need you to understand that I'm still here, still part of this family, and I'm not going anywhere. She nodded, but I could see the weight of her own guilt pulling her down. She wanted to help, but she didn't know how, and I couldn't blame her. I had been absent too in my own way for too long. We both had to come to terms with what had happened, and it wasn't going to be easy. I stood up from the table, feeling a strange sense of resolve. This wasn't going to be fixed in one conversation. It wasn't going to be solved overnight. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was making progress. I had taken a step, and maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something better. Take care of yourself, Laura, I said as I turned to leave. And think about what I said. I don't want anything from you except honesty. Just be honest with me. As I stepped outside, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. It wasn't a perfect resolution. It wasn't the closure I had hoped for, but it was something. And for the first time in a long while, I believed that something was better than nothing. I wasn't invisible anymore. I had taken the first step toward taking control of my life again. And whatever happened next, I knew I wasn't thinking about what had happened. It wasn't easy to sit with the feelings that came up after talking to Laura. I felt like I was standing on a precipice, unsure of which way to move, unsure of what would happen next. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for things to fix themselves. I had done enough of that. It was time to make a change, not just for me, but for the people I had spent my life trying to help. But that didn't mean I knew exactly what to do. The one thing I kept coming back to was my relationship with Kate. She was the one who had hurt me the most, who had pushed me out of her life so easily. I had spent so many years doing everything for her, loving her unconditionally, only to be discarded the moment she didn't need me anymore. The thought of it made me sick to my stomach, but it also gave me clarity. I wasn't just fighting for respect anymore. I was fighting to be seen, to be heard. The house had been unusually quiet in the days since my confrontation with David. I hadn't heard much from Kate, and I wondered if she was deliberately avoiding me. But I couldn't let that stop me. I wasn't the kind of man who could just disappear without making my presence known. I decided to go to her. I had to do this face to face. I couldn't stand the distance between us any longer. Couldn't let the silence be our final answer. So, I made up my mind and walked down the path to the main house once more. This time, I wasn't just looking for an apology or even an explanation. I was looking for something deeper, an acknowledgement that I was still here, that I still mattered. I knocked on the door again, my heart pounding in my chest. Felt like I had been knocking for years, waiting for someone to answer. This time, when the door opened, it wasn't just David standing there. Kate stood behind him, her expression unreadable. She looked older, more tired, as if the weight of everything had finally caught up to her. "Dad," she said softly, the word strange on her lips, like it had been so long since she had used it. I took a deep breath. "We need to talk, Kate." Her eyes flickered briefly toward David, and I could see the tension between them. But she stepped aside, letting me in without saying another word. We all stood there in the entryway for a moment, the silence thick and heavy. It was like we were all waiting for someone to break the ice, but none of us knew how. Finally, it was Kate who spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "What is it you want from me, Dad?" The question hit me harder than I expected. What did I want from her? The truth was, I wasn't sure. I knew I didn't want her pity, and I didn't want her to feel obligated. I wasn't asking for charity or forgiveness, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she needed to see things from my perspective. She needed to understand how much her actions had affected me. "I want you to see me, Kate," I said, my voice rough with emotion. "I want you to stop treating me like I'm invisible, like I'm just something you can forget when it's convenient. I've been here for you your whole life, and now, when I need you the most, you're acting like I'm not even a part of your life anymore. How do you expect me to feel about that?" She looked down, her eyes brimming with tears, but she didn't say anything. David, standing silently beside her, shifted uncomfortably. I didn't care. This was between Kate and me. This was the moment I had been waiting for. "I did everything for you, Kate," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "I worked my ass off to give you a better life. I sacrificed everything. And this is how you repay me? By turning your back on me when I need you the most." Her breath hitched, and for a moment, I thought she might say something. But instead, she just stood there, tears spilling down her face. David stepped forward then, his voice low and defensive. "Richard, you're making her feel guilty," he said, his tone sharp. "This isn't helping. You need to stop pushing her like this." I turned to face him, my patience wearing thin. "No, David, I'm not making her feel guilty. I'm making her see the truth. For years, I've been trying to get through to her, to let her know that I'm not just some old man who's here to serve her. But she's too busy with her own life to see it." Kate flinched at my words, and I immediately regretted the sharpness in my voice. But the anger, the frustration, the years of unspoken hurt, it all spilled out at once. I had kept it in for so long, trying to make peace, trying to keep everyone happy. But it hadn't worked. It never worked. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Kate," I said, my voice softening. "I'm not asking for you to make this right. I'm asking for you to stop pretending I don't exist. I'm asking for you to see me for who I am, not for what you think I am. I'm not your servant. I'm not your punching bag. I'm your father, and I deserve to be treated like it." She wiped at her tears, but her expression was still distant, like she couldn't quite process what I was saying. I could see the confusion in her eyes, the way she was trying to reconcile the person I was now with the father she had known when she was younger. "I don't know what you want me to say," she whispered. I felt a deep ache in my chest. This wasn't how I had imagined it going. I thought that by confronting her, by telling her everything, she would finally understand. But it wasn't happening. I wasn't going to force her to feel something she wasn't ready to feel. But I needed her to know that I had done my part. I wasn't going to be her punching bag anymore. I had nothing left to give, not if she wasn't willing to give something back. "I'm done, Kate," I said, my voice breaking. "I've spent my whole life trying to fix things, trying to make everyone happy. But I can't keep doing that. Not anymore." Kate didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. I had said my piece. I wasn't waiting for a happy ending anymore. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I was done. I turned to leave, the silence of the house swallowing me whole. As I stepped out the door, I felt a strange sense of finality. Something had shifted, and I couldn't tell if it was for better or for worse. But I knew that I had spoken my truth, and that was all I could do. The rest was up to them. But as I walked down the path away from the house, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. I wasn't invisible anymore, and that, for now, was enough. The days following my conversation with Kate were strange. I expected some sort of resolution, but instead, there was just more silence, more distance. It was as if she had retreated into herself completely, unwilling to acknowledge what had happened between us. It hurt, but I wasn't surprised. She had always been good at building walls when things got tough. But that didn't change the fact that I had said everything I needed to say, and I wasn't going to keep chasing her down, trying to make her see something she wasn't ready to see. I spent most of my time in the shed, not because I had nowhere else to go, but because I had grown used to it. It had become a refuge, a place where I could think without distractions. It wasn't the most comfortable place to live, but it was mine. It was the only thing I had left to call my own. The house no longer felt like home, not with the tension that lingered in every room, every corner. I couldn't As the sun dipped below the horizon and the cool air settled over the land, I found myself walking back to the main house. It wasn't something I had planned. I didn't even know why I was going, but something inside me told me I had to do it. It was time to have the final conversation, the one I had been avoiding for so long. It was time to talk to David. When I arrived at the house, the door was already open, and I could hear voices inside. Kate and David were talking, their voices rising in volume as I stepped closer. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should interrupt, but then I realized that this wasn't about them. This was about me. I wasn't going to stand outside any longer, waiting for an invitation to be part of their world. I wasn't going to be the outsider anymore. I walked in without knocking, the door swinging open with a soft creak. Kate looked up, surprised, but David didn't even glance in my direction. He was busy talking, his words loud and forceful, trying to make a point I couldn't care less about. It was clear that he was angry at me, at the situation, at everything, but I wasn't going to back down now. David, I said, my voice calm but firm, we need to talk. His eyes narrowed as he turned to face me, but I wasn't afraid of his glare. I had seen it before and I knew how to handle it. What I didn't know was how this conversation would go, or if it would even make a difference. But I couldn't walk away anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. I don't know what you think you're doing, Richard, David said, his voice low and clipped. But you can't keep showing up like this, demanding things from us. I felt my blood start to boil, but I held myself together. I'm not demanding anything, David. I'm not asking for your approval or your pity, but I am asking for respect. I've given everything to this family, and all I've gotten in return is your indifference. You think I don't see it? You think I don't notice how you treat me? Kate flinched at my words, but David didn't back down. He crossed his arms over his chest, a defensive posture, as if he thought he could shut me down with his physical presence alone. You don't get it, do you? David said, his voice rising. We've been trying to be patient with you, but you're not getting the hint. You've been a burden on us for years, Richard. You've outstayed your welcome. His words hit me harder than I expected. I had heard them before in different forms, but hearing them from David, hearing them said so bluntly, it stung. I had always known he resented me, but I didn't realize how deep that resentment went. He didn't see me as family. He didn't see me as someone who had done everything for him and Kate. He saw me as a problem, something to be dealt with when it was convenient for him. Is that how you really feel? I asked, my voice quiet but laced with hurt. David didn't hesitate. Yes, you've been nothing but a drain on this family, and it's time for you to go. The words hit me like a slap, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I had never felt so small in my life. I had spent so many years giving, so many years working to build something, to be a part of something. And now, David was telling me it had all been for nothing, that I was nothing. I turned to Kate, my eyes searching hers for some sign of understanding, some glimmer of the daughter I had raised. But all I saw was a stranger, someone who had grown so far away from me that I didn't know who she was anymore. You're not going to say anything? I asked her, my voice barely above a whisper. You're just going to let him talk to me like this? Kate looked down, unable to meet my gaze. It was as if she was ashamed, but she wasn't ashamed of David. She was ashamed of me. She couldn't stand up for me, couldn't defend me because it was easier to just let him say whatever he wanted. David saw my expression and smirked. That's right. Kate knows what's best for this family. She's just too nice to say it herself. But she agrees with me. You need to go. I didn't know what to say anymore. I had been hoping for a moment of clarity, a breakthrough that would make everything right again. But this was just the final confirmation of what I had feared for so long. I was nothing to them. I had been discarded, cast aside. I'll go, I said, my voice quiet, but I could feel the weight of my words. But don't expect me to come back. I turned to leave, But before I stepped out the door, I paused and looked back at Kate. Her face was still turned down, her eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. I wanted to say something to her, anything, but I couldn't. There was nothing left to say. I had given everything I could, and it wasn't enough. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, the door slammed shut behind me, and I realized with a sinking feeling in my chest that I had lost them both. I wasn't sure what came next. All I knew was that I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep begging for a place in their world. It was time for me to go. Time to find my own way, whatever that might look like. The path ahead of me was uncertain, but it was mine. I didn't know how long it would take to find peace, or if I would ever find it. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to be invisible anymore. I wasn't going to let them erase me from their lives without a fight. The only question now was whether they would ever see me for who I truly was. The next few days were filled with a sort of numbness, a strange detachment from everything I had known. I had left the house, left Kate and David, and all the anger and hurt I had carried for so long seemed to dissipate into the night air. But it didn't feel like freedom. It felt like walking away from something that should have mattered, from people who should have cared. And yet, I wasn't sure if I was ready to let go, not completely. I found myself moving through the motions of life without truly engaging in any of it. I wasn't the kind of man to just give up, but right now, it felt as though I was at the end of something. Something big, something irreversible. I didn't know where to go next. I didn't know who I was anymore. I spent the first night in a cheap motel, the kind of place you find at the edge of town, where the fluorescent lights buzz incessantly and the beds smell of stale air and cleaning products. It was a far cry from the life I had once had, from the family I had once been part of. I stared at the cracked ceiling, wondering how it had all gone so wrong, how things had gotten to this point. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about work, or about helping others, or about trying to fix everyone else's problems. I was just thinking about me, what I wanted, what I deserved. It felt strange to focus on myself after all these years of being the one who was always there for everyone else, the one who put his needs last, the one who kept quiet when his heart broke. I spent the next day walking around the small town, looking for some sort of distraction, but nothing seemed to grab my attention. I had no place to be, no one to answer to. I was a man adrift, and it was harder than I expected. There were moments when I wanted to turn around and go back to Kate's house, to beg for some kind of reconciliation, but I knew that wouldn't work. I had already said everything I needed to say. Any attempt to go back would only reinforce the idea that I was willing to beg for something that wasn't coming. Late that afternoon, I received a call that made my stomach drop. It was from Kate. I let it ring a few times before I picked up, unsure of what I was going to say. When I answered, her voice was shaky, she said softly, her words coming out in a rush. I need to talk to you. I was silent for a moment, trying to process her words, trying to understand why she was calling me now. After everything that had happened, after everything I had said. I'm listening, I said, my voice flat but calm. I'm sorry, she whispered, and the sincerity in her voice caught me off guard. I've been thinking about everything, about how I've treated you, and I don't know what to say. I don't know how to make it right. I was silent for a long moment, trying to gather my thoughts. I had imagined this moment, but now that it was here, I didn't know what to do with it. The hurt was still fresh, raw, but there was something in her voice, something that told me she wasn't just saying the words because she felt obligated. She meant it. I've been selfish, she continued, her voice trembling. I've been so focused on my own life, on what I wanted, that I didn't even think about how you were feeling. I didn't think about how you were always there for me. I'm so sorry, Dad. It wasn't enough. The apology wasn't enough. But it was a start. It was a crack in the wall that had been built between us, and I wasn't going to let that go unnoticed. I don't know if I can forgive you, Kate, I said, my voice thick with emotion. It's not just about what you said or what you did. It's about everything. It's about the years I spent feeling like I didn't matter to you, like I was invisible. I can't just forget that. I don't expect you to, she said quickly. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, not yet. I just want you to know that I see it now. I see how much I hurt you, how much I took you for granted, and I don't want to keep living like this. I don't want to keep pretending everything's fine when it's not. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting her words wash over me. I could feel the weight of the years, the weight of the disappointment and betrayal. But there was something in her voice, something that made me believe she was finally ready to understand. Finally ready to see me, to see the person I had always been. "Where are you?" I asked, my voice softer now. "I'm at home," she said, her voice shaky. "Please, can you come back?" I hesitated. The thought of going back, of stepping into the same house where everything had fallen apart, made my stomach churn. But I knew that if I didn't go now, if I didn't give this a chance, I would never have the opportunity again. "I'll come," I said, the words leaving my mouth before I could think better of them. The drive back was long and quiet, my mind racing with thoughts of what I might find when I got there. Would things really be different? Could I really trust her again? And if I did, what did that mean for me? For us? For the family we had once been? When I arrived, the house seemed oddly still. There were no sounds of laughter or conversation. No signs of the life that had once filled it. The air felt thick, heavy with the unspoken words that hung between us. Kate was waiting for me by the door, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. She stepped forward as soon as she saw me, and I could see the guilt in her expression. But there was something else too. Something I hadn't seen in a long time. Vulnerability. "I've missed you," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. "I've missed my dad." I didn't know what to say. I had spent so much time trying to convince myself that I didn't need her, that I didn't need anyone, that I had forgotten what it felt like to be wanted, to be loved. I had spent so long convincing myself that I was better off alone. But now, standing here in front of her, I wasn't so sure. "I've missed you too," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. And in that moment, something shifted. Maybe it wasn't forgiveness, maybe it wasn't resolution, but it was a step forward. A step that I wasn't sure where it would lead, but a step nonetheless. It had been a few weeks since I returned to Kate's house. It wasn't easy, and it didn't feel like the same place I had left. The air between us was still thick with unspoken words, but at least we were trying. We were learning how to exist in the same space again. After all the hurt, the betrayal, the years of feeling invisible. But things were different now. Not necessarily better, but different. It felt like we were both standing on a precipice, each unsure of the next step. Kate tried, I could see that. She was more present, more engaged than she had been before. But there was still that distance, that hesitation. I wasn't sure if it was because she was trying to prove something to me, or if she was still afraid to fully let go of the past. For my part, I tried to be patient. I tried to understand that healing didn't happen overnight. That even though I had been betrayed, even though I had given so much and received so little, I couldn't expect her to undo all that damage in a matter of days. But the silence, the uncomfortable silences that often filled the room, were wearing me thin. David, on the other hand, was a different story. Since the day I left, I hadn't heard a word from him. At first, I thought he might come around, that he might reach out to me. But as the days passed, it became clear that he wasn't interested in reconciliation. The silence from his end spoke volumes. He had made his feelings clear the night I left, and he didn't seem inclined to change his stance. It hurt. I won't lie. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. But I had come to a point where I realized that I couldn't keep chasing people who didn't want to be a part of my life. I had to stop waiting for them to see my worth and start living as though I mattered. For too long, I had sacrificed my own well-being for the sake of others. But now I was learning to put myself first. One evening, after a quiet dinner with Kate, I went to the shed. I needed space to think, space to breathe. The weight of everything, the past, the present, and the uncertainty of the future, was too much for me to carry in one room. The shed, with its old wooden walls and the smell of sawdust and memories, was my retreat. It was where I could think without anyone watching me, without anyone expecting anything from me. I sat on the old stool I'd gotten used to over the years, staring at the pile of tools I had once used to fix everything in my life. I had always been the fixer, the one who could make things better, make things right. But there was no fixing this, no way to repair the rift that had formed between me and my family. Not without a lot of work, and even then, I wasn't sure if it could be fixed at all. It was then that I realized something. As much as I had hoped for reconciliation, as much as I wanted to be part of their lives again, I had to stop waiting for them to change. I had to stop expecting them to make up for the years of hurt, because they might never do it. And I couldn't keep holding my breath, waiting for something that might never come. I had to forgive myself. I had to let go of the idea that they owed me anything. That was the only way forward. I had to stop letting their actions, or their lack of actions, define who I was. I had to take back control of my own life. I spent the next few days thinking about what that would look like. What would it mean to take control of my life again? What did I want for myself, now that I wasn't bound by the expectations of others? I decided that I needed to take a break, to get away from everything. A small part of me wanted to prove something to Kate and David, that I could still stand on my own, that I didn't need them to be happy. But a bigger part of me realized that I wasn't doing this for them. I was doing it for me. I had spent so many years giving, so many years putting everyone else's needs before my own, that I had forgotten what it was like to live without them, without the weight of their expectations. So I made plans to leave. Not forever, but long enough to clear my head, to figure out what came next. When I told Kate, she didn't seem surprised. She didn't beg me to stay, didn't try to guilt-trip me into changing my mind. In a way, it was almost a relief. She had changed, I could see that. But she also understood that I needed to find my own way, to figure out who I was when I wasn't trying to fix everyone else's problems. "Do you think you'll come back?" she asked, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I need some time. I don't know where this will take me, but I need to figure it out." She nodded, her expression unreadable. I wanted to believe that things would get better, that the distance between us would shrink over time, but I wasn't sure anymore. The road ahead was unclear, but I was beginning to accept that uncertainty wasn't always a bad thing. Sometimes it was the only thing that could lead to real change. I left the next morning, my bags packed and my heart heavy. As I drove away from the house, I couldn't help but feel a sense of finality. Maybe it was just for now, but it felt like a chapter of my life was closing, and that was okay. As I made my way down the winding road, I looked ahead at the unknown, at the future that was waiting for me. It was daunting, but it was also freeing. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going back to being the person I had been. I was going to build a life for myself. Not for Kate, not for David, for me. And as the miles stretched out behind me, I felt the weight of the past begin to lift. Not all at once, but piece by piece. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the possibility of something new on the horizon. I didn't know what it would look like, but I was ready to find out, because at the end of the day, I had finally learned that the only person I needed to make proud was myself.